Sometimes the tundra brings back something that should have remained buried forever. In January 2004, I realized this with my own experience when I found something in the permafrost that 25 years ago someone was very keen to hide. Then I had to choose between duty and common sense, between truth and safety. My name is Andrei Vitalyevich Kosov. I am 44 years old. I work as a senior gamekeeper in the Taymyr Nature Reserve, Katanga North section. Before that, I worked with people who solved business disputes in their own way. In 1999, one dispute went too far. Well, you know how it was in the 90s. To wrest debts from the plant, to control deliveries, to explain the rules of the game to new entrepreneurs. There was enough work for everyone, money too, until the big cleanup started. I was the only one left of our brigade, and that was only because I realized in time that it was time to get away. As far away from cities, from people, from all this as possible. The tundra turned out to be the only place where you could get lost safely. I've preferred solitude ever since. Here you can control every step, every decision. Here your life depends only on you. But on that January day, I realized that even in the most desolate places on the planet, the past can catch up with you and make you make choices that change everything. I woke up at 7:30 in the morning of the 15th of January 2004. Outside the cordon window it was polar night. The sun had not risen for the second month. The thermometer outside the window showed -42. In such weather, even animals lie down. But work is work. There was a crackle of static on the radio, so the weather would change. I put the kettle on the stove and checked the reports. Nothing special. A planned round of the site, checking the camera traps on the southern border. The route is familiar, but after yesterday's snowfall it would be better to leave early. During 4 years in the reserve, I got used to the rhythm of the tundra. Rising at dawn, although in winter there's practically no dawn, only a short twilight in the middle of the day. Checking equipment, liaising with the base, breakfast, then work on the site until dark. The radio call came at 8 in the morning. The voice of the base operator cut through the static. Kosov over. You're on camera 7. Last night at 11:40 p.m. Check it out. Cell number 7 was in the area of old geological workings, about 20 kilometers from the cordon. The place is remote. No one should be there in winter. Even reindeer herders avoid that area, as there was too much abandoned iron. Got it. I'm leaving in an hour. I packed quickly. Half a century of experience had taught me to take everything I needed with me. A thermos with tea, stew, bread, spare gloves and socks in a sealed bag. Radio R159, camera Zenit with a spare film. Compass, maps, torch with batteries, first aid kit. The Buran snowmobile did not start immediately. Even old Soviet equipment is capricious in such a frost. But it started. These machines were made with conscience. I left at 10:30. It took an hour and a half to reach the place along a familiar route. First along the bed of the frozen Malaya Katanga River, then turning south to the spurs of the Anabar Plateau. I drove carefully. On a polar night, one mistake is enough not to return. I remember the old gamekeeper Semyonich telling me a story about a geologist who in 1987 decided to take a shortcut through a swamp. They found him only in spring, 200 meters from the winter camp. He had frozen trying to get out of the ice hole. Since then, I have never deviated from proven routes, especially in the dark. The tundra does not forgive self-confidence. The headlight illuminated 20 meters ahead, then black emptiness. I orientated myself by compass and memory. I knew every rock, every bend in the riverbed by heart. After an hour, I started to notice strange things. The snow on the route was uneven. In some places I could see ski tracks. Someone had recently traveled along this route. The tracks were fresh, not older than 2 days. It was alarming. Officially, no one was allowed into the reserve without a permit, and they didn't issue permits for this area in winter. It was too dangerous. I reached the chamber around noon. I knew the place well. A small valley between 2 ridges where geologists had drilled wells in the 70s. Now only rusty pipes stick out of the snow and the wreckage of machinery under the snow. The camera was hanging from an old surveyor's tower. I drove closer, switched off the engine. In the silence of the tundra, I could hear only my own breathing. I noticed at once that the snow under the camera was crumpled. Someone was standing here and for quite a long time. I examined the footprints carefully. Heavy shoes, deep-treaded soles, military boots, or something similar. There was more than one person, at least 3. But the strangest thing was that the footprints were not coming from the border of the reserve, but on the contrary, from inside the territory. It was as if people had already been here and only then approached the camera, checked the trap itself. The film captured 12 frames. The infrared light showed indistinct silhouettes near the abandoned well number 12. People in winter clothes, faces indistinguishable. One was holding some sort of metal detector. I followed the tracks. They led in the direction of the well, winding between dumps of old rock. About 50 meters from the derrick, I came across something that made me stop. There was a hole in the frozen ground, fresh, no older than a week, 3 meters deep, about 2 meters wide. The edges were smooth, not shoveled, too neat for manual labor. I went down into the pit cautiously. At the bottom was a wooden box frozen to the permafrost. It was old, cracked, but sturdy. On the sidewall in faded letters, USSR and the numbers 79024P. And next to the box is a package of Russian Army soup rations. The expiry date is 2003. That's when I realized someone had been looking for this box on purpose, and they did. But where are the seekers themselves? I stood over the pit and tried to figure out what was going on. A Soviet crate from 1979 and fresh army rations. The picture didn't add up. Either someone had been looking for this crate for a very long time or had found it by accident. But there are no accidents in the abandoned tundra, especially in winter. I sat down on the edge of the pit and took out a thermos. The tea was still hot. Good. In such a frost, it is important to keep warm. While drinking, I thought about the situation. The tracks led from inside the reserve, so the people did not come from the border, but were already here. Perhaps they have a base or camp somewhere nearby. The equipment is serious. The metal detector saw a camera trap on the footage, not tourists. The question is, where are they now, and what were they looking for in that box? I put the thermos away, took out my camera. I learned in the 90s that any little thing could be important, and memory fails. I had to record everything before it was too late. Started shooting everything in a row. First, a general view of the pit, then a close-up of the box, the ration pack, tracks in the snow. Any little thing could be important. I tried to pull the box out of the frozen ground, but it held firmly. It was frozen solid, 25 years old. I needed tools, a crowbar, a shovel. I only had a knife and a hatchet. While I was fiddling with the box, I noticed a strange thing. Nearby, on the edge of the pit, were modern tools, a folding shovel, some kind of device with a digital display like a metal detector. All clean, no rust. Clearly not local. Picked up the device, heavy, complicated. There are inscriptions in English on the case, manufactured in Germany according to the markings. Such equipment costs money, serious money. That's when I broke out in a cold sweat. Not from the cold, but from realization. Someone had come here with professional equipment, knew exactly where to dig, and left their expensive equipment behind for nothing. It meant only one thing. Something spooked them, made them leave quickly. He looked around. The tundra was silent. Not a sound, except for the wind and his own breathing. But the feeling of anxiety was growing. The same feeling that had saved my life more than once in the 90s. When it feels like you're being watched. I decided to try to contact the base. Took out the radio, tuned the frequency, nothing but static. Tried the backup frequency, same thing. Either atmospheric phenomena or something was jamming the signal. At this time, the weather began to deteriorate. The wind picked up and the snow began to fall. Visibility was dropping before our eyes. Half an hour more and it would be a real storm. But curiosity got the best of me. It looked too strange. I took an axe and began to carefully chip away the ice around the box. It was slow work, but there was no other way out. After half an hour, one corner was cleared. There was something else under the crate. Something white, irregularly shaped. Dug around some more and realized what it was. A human bone. A big one, like a femur. And there's another one next to it, and another. I stopped and stepped away from the hole. My heart pounded like it had when I was young. when I first came under fire. My hands shook, not from the cold. They were human remains. Several people, judging by the number of bones, had been lying here for a long time, 20 or 30 years at least. The permafrost had preserved everything as it was. The wind picked up even more. The snow fell horizontally, whipping at my face. Visibility dropped to a few meters. We had to go, but first I fixed the find. I took a few more pictures, put the tools in my rucksack. I left the metal detector behind. It was too heavy for the return journey. I got to the snowmobile in a complete white haze. I started it at the third attempt. The battery was dying in the cold. I drove slowly, following the compass. The familiar road turns into a labyrinth in a blizzard. After a kilometer, I noticed lights. At first I thought it was a stress hallucination, but no, they were definitely shining. A few points away from my route, in a lowland between the spurs. Someone has set up camp on the tundra, in the middle of a blizzard. I switched off the engine, waited. The wind died down for a minute, and I heard sounds, human voices. They spoke in Russian, but with an accent. Not locals, that's for sure. I get it, these are the same archaeologists. They haven't gone far. They are waiting for the storm to subside so they can return to the pit. But what are they looking for? And why would they abandon expensive equipment? Started the snowmobile and drove on. It would be suicide to approach someone else's camp in such weather. And these people were clearly not tourists. Professional equipment, knowledge of the terrain, readiness to work in the polar night. Everything spoke of a serious operation. I reached the cordon in complete darkness. I could barely find my way. The GPS didn't work, the compass was malfunctioning. The only thing that saved me was that I knew the route by heart. I remember how in the first year of my work as a gamekeeper, old Semyonik told me, "Andriuka, technology is good, but it is iron, and iron dies in the cold. But memory and instinct, they are with you to the end." Then I didn't really understand what he meant. I thought I was old, out of touch with life. But today his words saved the day. When all the devices failed, I orientated myself by snowdrifts, by the shape of hills, by the way the wind bends bushes. The tundra itself showed me the way home. The main thing was to listen to it. On arrival, I stoked the cooker and put the kettle on. My hands were still shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization of what I had found. I sat down at the table and tried to gather my thoughts. In the 90s, I saw everything. Blood, violence, death. I thought nothing could shake me up like that. But those remains in the pit, that was something else, not a crime spree where everything is clear. Who, why, for what. There was a mystery here, a secret that someone had been trying to hide for a very long time. And now, other people, with expensive equipment and a clear plan, are digging up this mystery. And I found myself in the middle. I poured tea into a mug. My hands gradually stopped shaking. The warmth from the stove began to fill the hut, but the cold inside did not go anywhere. I realized that tomorrow I would have to make a decision, to report to his superiors, or to keep silent. But first I had to understand what I was in for. Human remains next to a Soviet box. Foreigners with expensive equipment. A camp in the middle of the tundra. What kind of history have I unearthed in this damn pit? I lay awake all night. I tossed and turned in my bunk, thinking about the remains in the pit and the alien camp. In the morning, I made up my mind to find out who these people were and what they wanted from the pit. On the 16th of January, I got up with the first twilight. Outside the window, the storm had subsided, but the wind was still blowing. The thermometer showed -38, quite working weather. I was going in a different way, not typical. I took binoculars and extra film for my camera. I left my radio at the cordon. If it didn't work yesterday, it wouldn't be any use today either. Thermos, rations, spare clothes, and a hunting knife, just in case. I left at 10:30. This time I did not go to the pit, but took a diversion. I wanted to approach the place where I had seen the lights yesterday. I drove carefully, often stopping and listening. In the tundra, the sound traveled far, especially in frosty weather. An hour and a half later, I saw smoke. A thin stream was rising from the lowland between two ridges. I hid the snowmobile behind a large boulder and continued on foot. I had to crawl up as the army had taught me. The snow crunched under my body, but the wind drowned out the sounds. I stopped 100 meters away and pulled out my binoculars. The camp was set up competently. 3 large tents of the army type, a camp kitchen, a storehouse of equipment under a tent. Everything was neat, military style, and the equipment was serious. 2 Yamaha snowmobiles, a portable radio station with an antenna, and boxes of instruments. There were 5 people, 4 men and 1 woman. They were dressed in good quality winter clothes, not of Russian manufacture. They spoke English among themselves, sometimes switching to Russian. The accent was strong, but it was understandable. One, who looked like a leader, was showing the others a map. He was a large man in his 50s with a gray beard. A woman was writing something down in a notebook. She was young, in her 30s, with glasses. She looked like a scientist or a translator. 2 others were dismantling some devices, metal detectors, GPR, something else unfamiliar. I started listening to their conversation. They were talking about the plane, that the cargo should be near the remains of the crew. They mentioned 1979, some kind of Operation Karibu. Then it hit me. The crate I found and the remains are from a crashed plane. 25 years ago, there was a plane crash here. I remembered the story of the old gamekeeper, Semanik. One evening, over tea, he was talking about the winter of 1979. He said that at that time, the military had banned flights over the reserve for a fortnight. Officially, it was a drill. But in reality, they were looking for something in the tundra. A classified operation. Helicopters were circling. Vehicles were traveling. Then everything stopped abruptly. The military left and the exercise was forgotten. Something fell there, Semyonix said. Something important. But we were told to forget it. At the time I thought the old man was fantasizing, but now I realized he knew the truth. A plane with a secret cargo had crashed here, and these people were looking for what was left of that operation. But the strange thing is, they obviously knew where to look. They had the exact coordinates, professional equipment. Someone led them to this place, someone who knew about the crash. I took out my camera, started taking pictures. People's faces, machinery, numbers on the equipment. There wasn't much film, so I shot carefully, choosing the best angles. Suddenly, one of the men turned his head sharply in my direction. I froze, out of breath. Was it just me, or did I really hear something? The man said something to the others, and they also looked in my direction. The leader took out his binoculars and started looking down the slope. I was lying behind a rock, not moving. But I realized that if they decided to check, they'd find me easily. Snowmobile tracks, prints in the snow, and there was nowhere to run. It was open country. They would intercept me. Lying there for minutes until they calmed down. The leader mumbled something, and they went back to their business. But now one of them kept glancing in my direction. I realized it was better to leave. But first I needed to hear something else important. Crawled a little closer. The woman was talking to someone on a satellite phone. From the fragments, she was reporting on the progress of the search. She mentioned that the local authorities didn't know anything and needed 2 more days to complete it. And then she uttered a phrase that made my heart race. The gamekeeper might have noticed something. We need to find him and talk to him. They knew about me. They knew there was a gamekeeper working here, and they were planning on talking to me. In the 90s, I heard such conversations more than once. Talk usually meant one thing, to make sure that the person would not say anything else. I began to crawl backwards carefully. Every meter seemed like an eternity. The snow creaked, the rocks rattled. It seemed as if the whole camp must hear me. I got to the snowmobile and started it on the first try, but I couldn't follow the old trail. They would quickly realize where I was watching from. I took a diversion through a rocky ridge where the trail was harder to follow. It took me 2 hours to get to the cordon. I kept looking around to see if they were following me, but the tundra was empty. I immediately developed the film at home. The pictures were clear. Faces, equipment, numbers on the equipment were clearly visible. If anything, there is proof. I sat down at my desk, tried to make sense of it all. A foreign group is looking for the cargo of a plane that crashed in 1979. They have precise coordinates and professional equipment, and they know about me. Question: what should I do next? Should I inform my supervisor or try to solve the problem myself? I learnt in hard times that sometimes silence is more valuable than the truth, especially when the truth can cost lives. But on the other hand, these people are trespassing on the reserve, digging without permission, looking for something that has been hidden for 25 years. I pulled out my radio, tuned it to the base frequency. This time the connection worked. "Base, this is Kosov. I need to speak to the chief right away." "Kosov's on duty. The chief's out of town until tomorrow. What happened?" He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he switched off the radio. I sat on the bunk and stared out of the window. The tundra was dark behind the glass. There was no chief, no normal communication. Maybe it was a sign? In the dashing 90s, I learnt to feel such moments. When fate itself tells me that it is better to be silent. Who knows what kind of people these foreigners are? Who's covering for them? What are their connections? And most importantly, what are they looking for in that cargo? Maybe it's better not to know. On the other hand, curiosity gnawed at me. My whole life has been such that secrets have found me on their own. First in the criminal world, now in the tundra. And each time I had to choose whether to go deeper or step aside. I decided to check the pit at night, not to report to my superiors, but for myself. I wanted to know what they found, then I'll see what happens. I left at 1:30 in the morning. I drove without headlights, from memory. There was no moon, but the snow reflected the starlight, so I could see quite well. It took me an hour to get to the pit. I knew right away I was too late. The place was empty. The pit had been filled in, the snow had been leveled. Even the tracks were partially covered. They worked carefully, professionally. Looked around with a torch. There was nothing left of the camp either. Only crumpled snow and snowmobile tracks leading northwards to the reserve's border. Took everything and disappeared. It's like they were never here. I stood over the backfilled pit, thinking, what secret had they taken with them? What was that 1979 operation hiding? And would I ever know the truth? But then he grinned. And do I really need the truth? I've seen it in the old days, and sometimes knowing it only adds to the trouble. And I've got enough problems as it is. I went back to the cordon, made tea. In the morning, I'll write in the logbook. Routine inspection. No violations detected. Camera number 7 malfunctioned due to frost. Everything's quiet. And it did become quiet. The tundra was quiet and empty again. Some old mystery drifted away to the north with the strangers, and I was left with my own thoughts and understanding. Not everything in this world needs to be known. Eight months have passed since those events. It is now September 2004, and winter is beginning in the tundra. During that time, I never told anyone about what I found in January. Even when the supervisor came back and asked about the camera going off, I lied. Said a fox had run through. In March, an inspector from Moscow came to visit us. During the conversation, as if in passing, he asked me if there had been any unusual incidents during the winter. I replied that everything was quiet. He looked carefully, nodded, and did not return to the subject. Maybe he knew. Maybe he was checking to see if the local gamekeeper would make a fuss. My choice to remain silent was the right one. Old Semyonik died in the spring. Before he died, he was raving, repeating something about the airplane and the military. Maybe he was remembering that winter of 1979. I don't know now. With his death, the last living memory of those events was gone. I hid the photos in a safe place. I didn't destroy them, I just let them sit there. You never know, they might come in handy someday. Sometimes I wonder what the cargo was. Why was it being sought after 25 years? Was I doing the right thing? There are no answers, and there never will be, but I've learned to live with it. There used to be a lot of unanswered questions. The only thing that has changed is that I have become more careful. I realize that the tundra still holds many secrets. Not all of them are safe, but for now all is quiet. The reserve lives its life. Deer migrate, rivers are covered with ice. The eternal cycle of nature, where human secrets are just a minor accident. Tundra keeps what is entrusted to her. And I became part of that silence, and you know what? I sleep better at night. Friends, you have just heard the story of gamekeeper Andrei Kosov, and what he found in the permafrost of the Taymyr. What would you do if you were him? Would you report it to the top, or would you also choose silence? After all, in 2004 the world was different. Without the internet, without constant communication, when a man in the tundra was really left to his own devices, and the most important questions remain unanswered. What was this 1979 Karibu operation? What cargo was the international team looking for? And why, 25 years later, was the mystery still so important? Perhaps somewhere in the archives there are still documents labeled top secret. Perhaps the vast tundra hides other traces of those years when the borders between countries were not only on maps, but also in the skies above the Arctic. And maybe Andrei is not the only one who keeps such secrets. How many gamekeepers, geologists, polar explorers know stories they will never tell? Do you think our hero did the right thing, or are there secrets that are still worth revealing, despite the risks? Remember, it is not the Earth that holds the deepest secrets, but the people who know how to keep silent. If this story has got you as much as it has me, support the channel by liking and subscribing. The tundra holds many more secrets, and some of them are waiting to be discovered. See you in the next issue.